How you guys doing, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? It's the Brandon Cruz Daily Fantasy Podcast, where I go and look at low and plays and strategies specifically designed for GPPs. This is a show for people who are already informed on daily fantasy sports and how these contests operate. If you have any questions that isn't stupid, feel free to send it to me on Twitter at BrandonCruzDFS. Most importantly, take everything with a grain of salt and use your best judgment making entries. Additionally, if you have a gambling addiction, that's just not my problem. Check your sense of feelings at the door. We're talking about the Daytona race this weekend. And my intro stands 100% of the time, but more specifically this week, because if you don't like my strategy, if you don't like the guys that I play, you don't have to play them. You don't have to listen to me. You can listen to other people, but this is purely what I do. Before I get into the drivers and the strategies, I just want to say I'm recording this at noon on Wednesday. Pricing is not out because pricing does not matter to me. I just wanted to get the official starting grid, and that's pretty much all I'm doing. If you don't like that, you don't have to listen. If you're tuning in Saturday morning or whatever, and you're watching this is recorded Wednesday, nothing has changed. Nothing is going to change for me. At the plate races, I absolutely only play positions and ownership, and I build for Wreckfest. So if the race is green, if the field does not wreck, I'm out $500 this weekend. That's just how it is between the two races, the Xfinity and the Cup Series. If they don't wreck the field, I'm going to lose. This strategy is going to lose. Normally loses 2 times a year. Normally works 2 times a year. I'm perfectly fine with that. Secondly, let's talk about some points that I think need to be talked about before we start actually breaking down, DFS-wise. And so when you look at the real world, what they're doing in NASCAR, they're lowering the horsepower from 510 to 450, making the tapered spacers a bit, or the holes a bit smaller to restrict airflow. They're also getting rid of the wicker bill on the spoiler, which is that little... if you got the spoiler right here, the wicker was that piece of metal that was bolted onto the top of the whatever plastic see-through thing the spoilers had that was pointing towards the rear window that would basically catch air. They used that to slow it down. They used that to slow the cars down at one of the Talladega races last year because they didn't like the speed that they were showing. Well, they're getting rid of that. They're arguing that if you get rid of that and you lower the horsepower, you're still going to be, we're going to be fine. We're trying to keep the driver safe. And this situation reminds me of a lot of what Ken Schrader said back in the day when the plate racing really started to form into what we see today. And that's Schrader and a lot of the drivers argued that although Allison blew his tire and flew into the catch fence at Talladega, and they're basically doing this for fan safety, in the driver's hands, sure, going faster is still more dangerous, but when you were able to pull away from the field got spread out. We didn't have these chaotic big wrecks that we see nowadays, and so a lot of the drivers would argue that, okay, sure, you're slowing us down, but you're making it harder for us to pull away. You're making it harder for guys to basically get safe because you're just stuck 2 and 3 wide. I feel it is a spitting image of what's happening this week. Sure, they're slowing the cars down. They're giving them less horsepower, but they're still going to get up to 196, 197. I still think we break 200 this weekend in the draft, certainly late in the race. And what another thing that's doing, and Busher talked about it, Dylan talked about it, a couple other drivers have talked about it this week already, and we're only Wednesday in, is that what the lower horsepower is doing is it's basically just getting rid of the big runs that we saw recently in the plate races that we've seen, or tempered spacer races that we've seen, in a sense of where you'd have a lane just get a huge run, or you see 2 or 3 guys pop out of a lane and then just skyrocket past other guys. So they're kind of diminishing the big runs that they're doing, and all that's going to do is allow blocks to happen more and more frequently, because the main deterrence of blocks recently was you're going to get your ass pounded by the guys behind you. You're going to get wrecked if you block the big run behind. And now that they're trying to limit, the breakaway speed of these cars already in the pack, it's just going to increase the blocking. Busher's already talked about it. As I said, other drivers have talked about it this weekend. And so I think if anything, that's just leaning more towards, pack race. And we're still going to see the drivers get single file. If a line gets dominant and then everybody either goes to the top, which should happen at some point in this race, it's still going to be boring at some points. But I think it's going to be harder to pass in a pack. And so I think we're just going to see guys kind of get stuck 2, 3 wide, not really able to make any headway, not really to make any breakaway. And so I'm still leaning this being a wreck fest due to that. Outside of that, you have cars that are not going to be used ever again. Okay, maybe use this at Talladega in the fall, but teams do not care about bringing this car home. It's been said by other drivers. It's you gotta win or bring us the steering wheel. These cars are expendable. They're not using these cars next year. They only have one race, if that, for these chassis, and so it doesn't matter. There's no incentive to save this car. There's absolutely no reason to save this car. With that said, I truly believe that Rick Ware, I believe that Quinn Houff are going to be bringing cars that are slightly better than what they've brought in the past, because yet again, they're not going to be using these cars again. Might as well buy on the cheap, buy an actual motor that's going to last or keep up with the draft, and financially it makes sense. That's what I would believe that they're going to do. Or they're trying to at least bring cars that are more competent and that are going to maintain with the draft than usual. Third point is that there's no practice, and so if a crew chief or a team fucks up the ride height or makes the car too loose, despite the fact we're going to be racing that night at Daytona does not have the grip level it used to have. It's going to be hot and humid this weekend, and so there's a chance that some of these cars unload. We've seen it in the past that Hendrick would basically design their cars to be too loose in the draft, and so without practice, we're kind of running the same cars that we ran at the Daytona 500, hoping that we can change the setup to run in this temperature. And so keep that in mind. Like, we're going to see some cars unload, start in the pack, and not be too stable. These drivers are going to be like, hey man, we're too loose, we're too tight, this sucks on the high side, this sucks entering, I get too loose out of turn 4, I'm too loose on the tri-oval. And so that's another thing to see. On top of the stage racing, there's the only two cars that I'm kind of concerned, or three cars that I'm kind of concerned about focusing on or playing this week is DiBenedetto, because I truly believe DiBenedetto wrecks the field at some point. Austin Dillon, because he and Tyler Reddick are basically racing each other, and although they're kind of going to be racing a conservative race, if you're points racing, you need to be up front to get the points at the stages. Nobody's pitting before the end of the stage at a plate race. And so I would argue nobody's plate racing. Everybody's in a must-win situation. If you're in the playoffs, you want those playoff points. You're going to be racing hard the entire time. Like, I don't see anybody sandbagging this race at all. That's just how NASCAR knows what they're doing. Last week was Daytona Light. The only reason we didn't wreck is because Kyle Larson in his interview said on that final little run to the checkered flag, that final restart, he lifted so he wouldn't wreck the field. But last week is going to be a spitting image of this week, to where we're going to get cautions late in the race. Drivers are going to have absolutely no reason to not race, and they're going to be wrecking each other. That's just what I truly believe in. And so now that I've said that for 7 minutes, and you kind of already know what I'm doing. But so let's go ahead and break down some track data. Just kidding. Throw this shit out the window. It doesn't matter. I don't care about how these drivers have performed at Daytona and Talladega. I don't even care what the drivers are. As I said, I mainly play ownership and positions. And so my main player pool is about 37 drivers, because I will probably have ownership 2 guys starting inside the top 10. Very few, if that, but the pool for me is about 36, 37 drivers. My main chunk of the pool that I want to use is going to be McLeod, Ware, Smithley, Houff, Bulicki, Gaze, Kaz Gralla, Landon Castle, and David Starr. David Starr is probably my least interested there, but these would be the guys that I want to target. This is what I want to do. I do want to make a note about Gralla and Castle. These guys are going to be incompetent cars. Obviously, you got Gralla in the Colleague 16. You got Landon Castle and the Gaunt Brothers 96. If you don't want to play the Rick Ware cards and you still need guys from the back, I would argue that Kaz Gralla and Landon Castle should be 100% in your lines. I would build around them completely, because they're guaranteed 10 positions at the very minimum. At plate races, I normally project people in the 30s to have a projected finish of 26 just across the board. And at a plate race, we're not focused on laps led or fast laps. Fast laps going to be distributed each lap throughout the field. You can't predict who's going to get the fast lap. It's just whoever is in the draft and who has the biggest pull in the race. Laps led, if we end up getting as many cautions as we might have, certainly towards the end of playoff or the end of stages, I think the laps that are going to be laps that are going to be spread out as well. And so building on place differential is what I mainly want to do. The reason that I focus on BJ McLeod and Ware and the Rick Ware cars is due to ownership. Certainly in single entries, when you put a lineup down for $121, Who do you have more faith in? Do you have more faith in a Suarez, Dillon, Chastain, Gralla, Castle, and Priest lineup? Or do you have more confidence in a, BJ McLeod, Ware, Smithley, Half, Bilicki, Gase lineup? It's going to be the first one, whereas I'll play the second one just because nobody's going to play him. I would argue that Cody Ware does not have any more advantage than Austin Dillon does in this race in terms of wreck. And when you look at the car, Dillon should perform way better, but it's a plate race. Anybody can wreck at any time. I'm mainly just playing ownership. And so if you recall, when you watched earlier in the year, I loved Derek Cope. Nobody was going to play Derek Cope. I think he came in at like 2 or 4% ownership, somewhere around there. He ended up blowing a tire, almost wrecked William Byron and somebody else early in the race, and then basically finished last in that. I believe he scored 2 points. Hey, guess what? That was still more points than people who wrecked in the big one a few laps later. And so would I take, Joey Gaze at 3 points over Suarez at, say, -11. I'm going to take Joey Gaze there. Gaze cannot lose you any points. These guys in the 30s, don't worry about their name. Starr is the only guy that I'm kind of concerned about not finishing the race due to a mechanical issue just because it is an MBM equipment. But Timmy Hill did not qualify for the Xfinity Series race. Him and the 77 were the cars that DNF'd in terms of the entry level. And when you look at what MBM does for their Xfinity Series program, they normally lease motors from Joe Gibbs Racing. And we'll talk about this more in the Xfinity Series. But Timmy Hill was going to be in the 13. He did not qualify for this race. And then you have David Starr, most likely having a Toyota motor in the 61. And you have, I forgot who the other car is right now. Just went blank, but just went blank on the top of my head. Was it just, they just entered 2, right? And the 66. So Jason White, I would argue, is most likely going to have a Toyota motor in that as well. And with Timmy Hill not qualifying for the Xfinity Series race, can't confirm this, but my interest would be, I think MBM is also going to lease a Toyota motor from Joe Gibbs in this race. Can't confirm that. I got no data to support that. Could be wrong later. That's really the only research that I'll probably be doing in this week. But it goes back to, these are the last time these cars are going to be used. These are the last time these motors are going to be used. This is the last time, basically this package, other than Talladega late in this year or in a few weeks, that's really the last time these cars, these components are going to be used. And so why not lease a motor? Why not bring better equipment than normal? You can do it. You can buy it on the cheap. And so I think MBM could be a team that is putting a little bit more money into this than they normally do. The Rick Ware cars, obviously, I've been a Rick Ware fan. I truly believe in these cars are going to get better in time, but I think they're going to run better equipment. I think even people like the Spire cars, like Corey LaJoie, Justin Haley, I think these guys are going to be bringing equipment that's quite good in this race. And so you need to add these guys to your pool. I would argue build your core out of 5 of these guys. 5 of the guys starting 28th to 40th. 5 of them in each line you build. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. But that's what I would do. When you're looking at, stacking from the back, you have to imagine, where is your line? Let's just say the invisible line is 21st. And so if you want 2 guys starting in the front, 4 guys starting in the back, 21st is your little cutoff line. So you take 2 guys starting inside the top 20, and you take 4 guys starting outside the top 21. And so, that's how you build lines. And so when you look at optimal lineups, obviously I'm not leaning towards the optimal lineups. Obviously, the Dega race this year really wasn't a wreck fest, and so you had Kaz Gralla, McDowell, Harvick, Keselowski, DiBenedetto, and Alfredo starting 38th, 23rd, 16th, 10th, 13th, and 30th. Wasn't necessarily a wreck fest, but I'm not going to end up on lines like this. Let me try and find a Daytona wreck fest line to see where these guys started, to explain to you why I play guys from the back where we at here. And so when we look at the fall race last year, wasn't as crazy as we thought, but we had Denny Hamlin optimal starting 25th, Ross Chastain starting 34th, McDowell starting 17th, Austin Cindric starting 39th, Chase Elliott starting, or this is the 500, excuse me, Chase Elliott starting 12th and Cole Custer starting 27th. And so really the only two guys who would be starting inside this invisible line of 21st would have been McDowell starting 17th and Chase Elliott starting 12th. And so nobody in the top 10 was even optimal in the 500 this year. Going back to what's optimal and what's going to score well, I want to put myself in a position to where I can have the highest ceiling of a lineup as possible, and that's playing guys from the back. If you want a decent floor with still a high ceiling, well then you migrate to playing guys starting in the back with good cars. That's why I would argue Kaz Grala and Landon Castle should be guys that you just put in your line. You can throw Alfredo in there. Alfredo's gonna have a good car. Alfredo's gonna be a good play. Chastain's gonna be a good play. Austin Dillon, Suarez, Custer. These guys are going to be good plays because they have good equipment. They're going to be way more on pace than the guys that I have in green, but they're also going to have more ownership. And so that's why I'm saying I play the ownership game. I play the guys that nobody wants to play because anybody can wreck in this race. And so hopefully we just get a complete wreck fest in this race. That's just all I want to see. My main suggestion to you would be to have a player pool of these guys. So 19th to 40th is your player pool. Put that in Fantasy Cruncher, put that in whatever optimizer you use, and build every single line completely out of anybody starting 19th to 40th. That's just what I want to do. That's all. That's how I'm going to approach it, okay? That's what I would suggest to you. As I said, my player pool, like if I want to play Martin Truex Jr., well, then you better believe I'm playing Truex Jr. with 5 guys from probably 32nd on back, just to make up for the chance that if Truex wrecks and gets me negative 25 points, I'm still fine because I have 5 guys in the back of the field that are going to gain positions if this turns into a wreck fest. I guess I'll put in the description a couple other videos about how I make lineups in more detail if you want to know about it. But like I said, it's just more of a position based type of approach. And so when we go into rankings here, this is more necessarily going to, at least when we get to Truex, this is just going to show my interest. What am I talking about? And so this is where my interest lies. That's how I would categorize my interest and probably my ownership. Let me open this up a little bit because I do want these guys. And so that's how it would be. All my main cores, my main lineups going to be built from 30th to 40th with sprinkling guys in from the rest here. That's just how I approach it. We don't know who's going to wreck. We don't know who's not going to wreck. There is no secret strategy. It's just building lineups that I believe leave me with a high ceiling and a low cumulative ownership. And in the past, certainly on FanDuel, I've played lineups that have a total ownership of maybe 11% on FanDuel. I've probably even less on FanDuel. If you're just playing on FanDuel this weekend, it's David Starr, Gaze, Balicki, Half, Smithley, LaJoy, Ware, and McLeod. That's it for me. And that's how I'm going to approach it. If you don't like it, that's understandable. But what can I say here? I can't sit here for 20 minutes saying I know who's going to do well and I know who's not going to do well because this is a plate race. Anybody can wreck. Anybody can't. If anybody's making any claims this week of this guy's going to be optimal or this is the way to do it, which you're going to see if you're on Twitter, you always see the winning DFS strategy and then it has picks. That's just how it's a plate race. Nobody knows who's going to wreck. All we can do is sit back, enjoy the showdown in no man's land of the modern day cowboy, and then just enjoy the race. Let's have a wreck fest. Let's flip somebody over. I truly believe we're going to do that. And let's have some big, huge pileups. And let's have a Rick Ware car win this race. Or let's have some Rick Ware cars finish in the top 25 again. Let's have Quinn Houff do well. Let's really play the ownership game. When we look at guys who I think are going to legit be chalk, if I have to project, and I'm not saying chalk at like 40%, but like I think people are going to play Chase. Where's Hamlin at? We're going to have Hamlin. We're going to have Hamlin be chalky. We're going to have maybe DiBenedetto. It's hard for me to pinpoint ownership between 10th and 20th. Maybe these guys, because we see Eric Almirola be quite consistent on plate races, and so I would use track history more to determine possible ownership than anything. And so really the only ownership that I would want to be overweight on would be Kaz Grala and Landon Castle. I think Kaz Grala and Anthony Alfredo, Kaz Grala, and Landon Castle are going to be the most popular plays from 30th on back. I would argue that LaJoie is going to be there as well, but you need to, and I'm not going to break it down here, but quickly speaking, the chassis that Corey LaJoie used when he got all his good finishes was one specific chassis. I can't remember off the top of my head where it came from, but I have it written down on a file over here of every race that chassis raced in and the ones that it wasn't in. One of the races that LaJoie wrecked in, he wasn't running that chassis. It was a Ford, I think it was from Roush or Penske, don't remember off the top of my head. And then he also had a fuel pump issue last year in the fall Talladega race to where he probably would have finished better. The main point is all like the top 15s, the top 10s that you see from LaJoie, sure, that's LaJoie avoiding wrecks, being in the right place, but I truly believe that was the chassis that they were using at Go Fast Racing. He's not in that here. And so just play Alfredo or play LaJoie just as you kind of would Chastain or Dillon or Suarez. Don't overanalyze all the top 10s that LaJoie had, because I truly believe it was that chassis and not necessarily him. So I just want to say that. So now that we have chalk here, and in terms of where the ownership is going to go, I would say, try and target the guys who this orange chalk is not around, to try and get, at least slightly ownership. Which is why, yet again, why I like the Rick Ware cars, why I like the Spire cars, or why I like the Quinn Houff and the 00, just because I don't think a lot of people are going to play them. And hopefully we can get a wreck vest. That's just how I approach it, pretty easily. Pretty much the same thing here. I'll just wait for Xfinity. I'll probably record that tomorrow. But thank you guys for listening. Yet again, if you want to hear more about it, look at the links in the description. I'll leave those there for you. Support me on PayPal if I helped you out in any way. If you like me building these or making these videos, consider sending $1 my way on PayPal, or joining the Patreon, or that's really about it. Join the Patreon or donate in PayPal. That's really all I like. But yeah, like I said, guys, just sit back, enjoy the race. Hopefully we get some big wrecks, man. Hopefully we get some huge wrecks. Lastly, yeah, that's pretty much it. No last thing. We'll talk to you later, guys.